Tim Huff has a new book out. It's called Bent Hope, a street journal. As I said off the top, I've read every word of it, and it's a pretty troubling book in many ways. In fact, Tim, I'm wondering, as you wrote it, and by the way, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you back, although I've not had you on the set before, but apparently you've been on several times, right, over the past few years?
Times, yeah.
How do you experience 22 years on the street, meeting the kinds of people that you're describing here in this book without developing a huge case of depression or hopelessness, uselessness, what's the pointness? I mean, how does, I mean, you talk about bent hope in terms of the lives of these kids. How about the hope in your own life?
It takes a lot of people to keep me well, I would say that. I have people who are gathered around me who have loved me and cared for me and invested, and people I've had to be very transparent and vulnerable with. I've had people encourage me greatly, but I've had critics to some of what I do or the approaches and things like that.
What kind of criticisms would come your way?
Enabling, for example. If you feed people on the streets of the major cities, are you enabling them to just stay there, to be there? I work with Youth Unlimited, which is the Toronto chapter of Youth for Christ. And so we've had in 60-something odd years, we've had a great transformation from being an organization that was about rallies and bringing people to the Lord. And what's happened with all of that? Well, lots of that still happens across the country, but my focus is under the bridges and critique, for example, around working with young kids who are prostituting. We're on a program within Light Patrol called Safe Light, and we work with young girls who prostitute. And even dealing with the idea that our laws criminalize them as opposed to the people around them, the Johns and these types of things. So you take a lot of critique from the Christian community, for sure.
Yeah. Time and again, you talk about going under the bridges and under some of the on-ramps to the Gardiner Expressway and so on, these sort of hidden alcoves where it's usually teenagers will congregate. What's it like for you when you walk into a situation like that for the first time with some kids that you've not met yet or that hardly know you? Is it kind of like a kid going into his first day of high school? I mean, do you feel nervous?
Well, longevity helps. One of the greatest assets to working on the streets is having a credibility. And so sometimes some of the other kids in the streets or even the drug dealers or the pimps are aware of us or aware of my team or aware of me, and they will at least know if it's a buddy on the street, for example, say, okay, you can trust this guy. And so quite often you walk into a situation where you maybe have not met that kid or that person, and you kind of have a lended credibility from several years already on the streets. But I will say there are different times. When I travel across the country, if I'm speaking in someone else's city, I always want to walk their streets and spend some time just out there on my own. And that feels very new. I don't think I'm afraid anymore. The truth is, many people think I'm homeless when I'm out there, so quite often I fit into part of their culture.
Yeah, you've had more than your share of people making rude comments because they think you're homeless, because they think that you're begging, you're panhandling.
If I sit down with one of my friends in the street and I'm just talking, I've had people spit on me, kick me. I've also had people give me money because they thought I was homeless. So it works all different ways.
Why the spitting? Why the kicking? Why the antipathy to the street person from so many of these people walking by?
Well, there's this great thing about, one of the things I try to communicate or to discuss often is about this idea of compassion and a radical compassion. And we're so lacking compassion. I mean, you would know so well in your ministries that people always feel they need the full story before they can be compassionate. There are many people that they kick and upset because they think if they're kids, it's because they're delinquent. If it's adults, it's because they're lazy. That's why they're out there. And they don't know the story. We all have our own story. And so they just won't offer that compassion. And then it kind of it backs them up and they say, I'm working hard, I've had a hard go at it, I do everything, and you're just out here wanting this or panhandling or whatever. And they just kind of they lose all their aggression on these people. I always say, though, if you knew the stories of some of my friends in the street, not only would you not be aggressive, you would drop to your knees and you'd say, I'll do anything to help you.
Well, for instance, Corinne comes to mind.
Yeah.
This little gal, if I'm remembering correctly, grew up in a God-fearing home.
Christian home, yeah.
With a father who was high profile in the local church, and
right.
Every night he would sneak into her room and basically rape her. Little wonder she's on the street. She's found it safer there than it was at home.
She's much safer. She feels she's much safer. And then that's why many of our young people or our adults don't even move into the shelters. You'll hear their beds available. They're sleeping on the streets. But if you could not inherently trust mom and dad not to hurt you, why would you go into another building and trust a total stranger not to hurt you? And so you're right. There would be an example of, do we need to know her whole story as we're walking by her in the street before we can be compassionate to her? You know, that was one of the other critiques, is that maybe I'm a bleeding heart, or...
What are you? Why are you doing this? I mean, you've been doing it for 22 years. That's called sustainable ministry. Obviously, you've got a deep root of motivation. What is it?
Well, when people ask me about the book in particular, I say this book is definitely not about how Tim Huff has been Jesus on the street. If you read it closely, there's a lot of, there's an unbearably large portion is about my failings on the street, but how I have been blessed. You asked me about encouragements. I have been so blessed by the people I've met, by their authenticity and their brokenness and their search for God. And I just keep feeling like God is leading me a little step further, now that I have a chance to do more advocacy and teaching and speaking and traveling. It's just a chance to share some things that maybe you'd need so much experience before you could start to speak it and say, this is really how it is. You need to look at it a little differently. It's not about guilt. It's about reaching people's